Welcome back to What's Next with Lacey. This week, I spoke with Mehmet, currently a client services manager at a fintech company, with previous experience in both product management and corporate strategy. Of course, we went into detail about all of those roles. We talked about his responsibilities, we talked about what his day-to-day looked like, etc. We also talked a lot about how to tackle the corporate world, how to grow and make yourself stand out, how to find the best learning opportunities, and so much more. It really was a fascinating conversation. As always, please listen, rate, follow, share this podcast with anyone who might be interested, and if you can, please leave a review on any of the platforms where What's Next is posted. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, YouTube. If you know it, we're there. So here's my conversation with Mehmet. Welcome to What's Next.
Thank you, Lacey. Excited to be here.
Good. I'm so glad. So let's dive in. Right now, you are working for the professional services arm of a financial technology company. So I want to start with, and I really mean you need to give us all the basics as if you're talking to someone, which you are, who knows nothing about it. What does a professional services arm of a financial technology company mean?
Sure. So I'll start first with, what is a financial technology company? How does that differ from a traditional financial services company versus a technology company? And then I'll dive into, within the company, what does a professional services arm do?
Perfect.
So financial services firms, it's actually one of the most regulated industries in the world. It is the most regulated industry in the world. There's a lot of compliance, red tape, and for good reason. We saw bank failures earlier this year. So if you're either an individual or a business and you trust your bank, you want to make sure that the right levels of, risk is under control. There is governance. Nobody's going and taking your money and doing anything stupid with it. So financial services companies move extremely slowly because there has to be that security aspect to it. Whereas with technology companies, the typical Silicon Valley rule is move fast, break things, apologize later. I'll give an example. Uber didn't really have licenses to operate in London when they were going internationally, but they just went and did it. Then they got a lawsuit for 2-3 years, but they got to operate in those years and they got to take market share from the local cap. So that's kind of the technology aspect of it. So a financial technology company is actually really interesting in that it has to sit between the duality of really slow, really regulated, extra careful with this super reckless, move fast, do things. And so we have products that cater to different financial services companies. We work with them. We make sure they keep their clients happy. So I think of our business as sort of a B2B2C, they say, business to consumer. So in the end, our products and tools that power the bank's technology will reach consumers, but I work directly with the banks. And within that, you might think, I'll again give some examples. So a big company like a Google or an IBM, you might think Google is search. Why does Google have 100,000 employees if it's just search? But there's a lot of things. So if, in Google, there might be the kind of side of it where you are selling ads to small businesses. And not only are you selling ads to them, but you're teaching them, if you're a local pizzeria, how do you put up a good Google ad so that you're actually going to see the return on investment on your advertising spend. And then afterwards, there's a role for a person at that company to go do that type of teaching, because then those businesses will buy more from Google. They'll advertise more. And it's sort of like a win-win relationship. So that's what the professional services arm of my company does as well. We have a nice symbiotic relationship with our clients where if they do well, we do well as well. So they get more clients, more deposits, more spend through their accounts or credit cards or all these sort of products that they have. Some of that kind of comes back to us with either revenue share or different types of deals we have. So the professional services arm is really to make sure we're a partner for them strategically. So can we help them set the right strategy? Can we empower them with the right technological tools when they don't have the capacity in-house to build these things, or they don't have the desire to build these things. Can we build these products for them, give it to them, make sure that customers are happy? And as a result, they sort of pay for our services, and we evolve that relationship over time.
Got it. What are the types of clients that you are working with? Is it small businesses? Is it larger companies? Or is it kind of a mix of everything?
So we work most with financial institutions and retailers, and we're trying to expand a little bit more to government as well, as we have a lot of data that governments could use about, let's say, like macroeconomic data. So in terms of banks, we'll work with even smaller community institutions like credit unions and like even smaller states in the US to the largest banks in the US, probably from which you have a bank account or a credit card, to different like newer fintechs. And we work with big retailers, big enough that they would have their own loyalty programs, or they would have like customers in like the millions. So those are the types of clients that we typically work with the most.
Oh, cool. So it's kind of like a mix of everything. That's very interesting. So now you have had a bunch of different roles in this space.
Yes.
So what are you doing right now?
So right now I'm a manager on our client services team, and my primary responsibility is to make sure that we do successful projects with our clients. We grow their business. We help grow our business as a result. We are able to sell more services and products to them. As you start getting more senior in your role, that relationship building and salesmanship aspect of it sort of grows and becomes a bigger part of your role. But I also sometimes take on internal corporate strategy projects if there's projects that are important to our executives and they need to tap our client services team to go and essentially do an internal project to them as a client. I do that as well.
So you're really hands-on with the client and working with them. Are you working with them like every day? Are you doing a lot of meetings? Are you kind of working more individually? How does that look like within your role right now?
Mm-hmm. So I work on multiple projects at a time, and I'll sort of compare and contrast this to the traditional management consulting type of roles, because I had an internship in one of those roles and I decided not to do that full time. So there, like that type of traditional management consulting, you're on site all the time, Monday through Thursday, then you fly back to your office on a Friday. You're working with the client teams, like long hours in office. Because what I mentioned about financial services companies being very slow, even if we try to do that, even if we offer that, saying like, hey, we'll come to your office, we'll work like 12 to 14 hours a day, let's get this stuff moving, we can't really get things moving because they'll say, well, our legal team needs to take a look at this. Well, our risk team needs to take a look at this, our compliance team. So there's a lot of periods in my projects where I'll do the work on my end, and then we need the client or someone else to kind of review and approve and do things. And if I was to work with one client at a time, that would not be efficient. We're with multiple clients at a time. So what a typical day can really differ, but a typical week might be, I have at least one call with all of my clients to go over the status of the project. What are we working on? What are the key things we want to accomplish this week? I'll have some, individual work to do to see, what do we need to accomplish? Let's say I get some data, I need to analyze it, I need to come up with some takeaways on what the client's strategy should be. I also work with junior resources on my team, so I have to make sure as a manager that I'm unblocking their time. So you really need to prioritize, typically during the day, if someone else needs my opinion to decide what to do next, that I prioritize so that they can go on about their day. And anything else I need to do individually sort of either becomes an early morning thing or a later night, uninterrupted thing to do on my own. So that's kind of my typical day-to-day. A mix of meetings, internal meetings as well, external meetings as well, and a little bit of individual and teamwork.
So basically your position is consulting, but underneath this umbrella.
Yes, it is.
Got it. How long do your projects for your clients generally last? You mentioned that you would have weekly goals, but is it kind of similar to consulting, to management consulting, in that it could vary between 3 months and 2 years, or is it a little bit more structured under this financial technology umbrella?
I would say our projects are more medium to long term, and actually long term in financial services means 2-3+ years. So maybe not that long term, but our partnership stays. And we're not a management consulting company that comes in, does something for 3 months, and then we get our fees, and then we leave. And you're successful, you're not successful, doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters for getting like further sales, but it doesn't really matter in the same way where if their business improves, we actually have some sort of revenue share agreements in place. So we get money back directly if we can improve the client's business. So we'll do projects anywhere from 2 to 3 months in the minimum. It's harder to do something much faster in this space. Like I don't really have 2-week projects or 3-week projects to a year. And sometimes if they're happy with the kind of work we're doing and they want further support, we'll extend that contract out another year, and we'll define new deliverables, new priorities for the relationship and the project, and we work on that. So.
And I think you mentioned earlier that you are on multiple projects at one time,
Yes.
which is another way that it differs from management consulting. So how many projects could it be at one time? Does that also vary?
That can vary on the type of project you're doing and like the type of work that you prefer to do. So typically, and also depends on kind of where you're at in your career. So a typical project team is staffed as 1 or 2 like junior resources or earlier on in their careers, like recent college graduates or 1 or 2 years of experience. And then there's sort of like a manager on top of them. And then there's sort of like some subject matter expert or someone who's more experienced providing governance and oversight to the project. So of course, if you're a junior, you really need to have dedicated time to your project to produce the deliverables. Your work, you're at more of that doing stage of things. So juniors will typically staff like 50% on 2 projects. And like we use that kind of percentage. We call it this metric utilization. So, 100% of your billable time is 40 hours. So, you should have 40 billable hours across your projects at the minimum. You can go over, like that happens, but at the minimum, you should aim for that. And, as you move up, so managers typically have, 3 to 4 projects. So you can have, 1 like big 50% project and 2 smaller 25% projects. And the people who are doing the governance and oversight, they're there to kind of review deliverables. They're there for escalations. If you see a risk, you say like, hey, the client's like compliance team like raised these questions about privacy for this customer survey that we're going to do. This might blow up our timeline by 2 months. How do we deal with this? And then it's that senior person's responsibility who's been there and done that to kind of guide you the right way. They might be on 10 projects because, they're just there as needed, and, they'll take the time with you when needed, but otherwise they don't need to be involved in the day-to-day. So depending on where you're at within the career ladder, the corporate ladder in this type of role, that's how many projects you take.
But you haven't always been in this client services space while you've been at this company that you're at now. Is that correct?
Yes. So I originally started in this role. I did it for about 3 years until I got promoted to a junior manager role. And at the time, I sort of had a decision to make between, okay, I'm going to start working with juniors and delegating things, or if I want to still try a role where I am an individual contributor, it'll be harder to switch back into that like later after becoming a manager and delegating to like have to go back and do everything yourself. But I said, it's better now for me to try out a different role where I can be an individual contributor. And then when I gain more seniority, I can still return to these different roles. So I actually took a sort of a 1-year rotational program within the company. I did 6 months of product management and product development, and I did 6 months of corporate strategy. So these are all actually pretty popular roles to exit to from consulting. So even those folks in traditional management consulting roles, they may try to exit to a big Fortune 500 company in these sorts of corporate strategy roles, other kind of internal operations roles within startups. You'll hear this called a strategy and operations. It's pretty popular. Product management is another transition. So one of the things that was actually very unique and cool about my opportunity with this company was that I got all of these internal opportunities without having to necessarily leave the comfort zone of jumping to another company or having to reestablish your reputation. I got those opportunities internally.
That's very cool. So can we go into detail about what those two positions were like? What were your responsibilities as this product manager?
So my responsibilities for this product management role is that essentially we were trying to figure out a strategy for a new developing technology on how should we approach this new space? What are our competitors going to do? What are we going to do? What kind of resourcing do we need to be able to do this? Like how many engineers, what type of partners? Because a lot of times it's not a single team that's building something, especially in a big company. If you're in a startup of 20 people, 50 people, then you might go out and build your technology on your own. But if you're at a 30,000 person, 50,000 person company like mine who works with the largest banks in the world with kind of implications like across the entire financial ecosystem, they're not going to let you build something with 10 engineers on your own with nobody else involved. You need to get people involved. You need to get partners involved. You need to involve even clients from an earlier process. So the difference between kind of more technology product management was that the proper way to do that within technology is, you do a lot of A/B testing. So if you're on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, they'll come up with a different test of like, what if we change the shape of this button from square edges to rounded edges or something functional? It doesn't have to be just cosmetic. They'll roll it out to like 0.01% of users, which is still like hundreds of thousands of users for these companies, and see if that changes any behavior statistically. And then they'll go ahead and apply that in consumer companies. Business, B2B companies, a little bit different, but still, you build the features, you kind of launch them, and you pray that you did your job right and your intuition about what the customer wants is correct. Spoiler alert, it's not often correct. Probably it's more often wrong. But the important thing is getting customer feedback and iterating on it. Whereas on the financial services side, and this is something that I actually found fairly frustrating, is that because there's all this regulation and compliance, and not only does everything have to work 100% correct, everything has to work 100% correct and have like a 99.9% like fail safe and like uptime, and like nothing could ever go wrong with it if it could. So that's why if we're building something for a client that's one of the bigger banks in the US, I can't just build it and take it to them and say like, hey, this is what we built. Do you want it? Do you give us feedback? They want to be involved in that process with you, saying like, hey, this is the type of thing we need. And it needs to have all this like security and compliance things. And it slows you down a lot. So frankly, 6 months was not nearly enough time to build something there. It would have required maybe 2-3 years of time to really go from the strategies and ideas I was working on to a finished product. But, in terms of learning experience, getting to see like how this type of work is done, it's a very good experience.
Yeah. Were you coding in this role?
I was not coding in this role.
But you were working with the engineers who were doing that.
Yeah, but I will say, I know you have questions later about kind of my computer science background, but computer science academically in school and application programming, like software engineering in these roles, is very different. So software engineering is very much like the architecture of the technology, like what's the back end, what's the like front end, what's like the middle layer, how do these technologies talk to each other, your software like development lifecycle, like so your different sprints, how you prioritize different features or different products, how you make your business cases, present it to executives. These processes are not really taught in school. The school is more kind of academic, like theory, kind of like, can AI take over the world and destroy humanity? What do you think? Type of thing, right? Whereas software engineering can be like very cut and dry. Actually, if you're working on a very small part of a very large project.
Yeah.
There's, at school I wrote code that was 2,000 lines maximum. Here, people are so it's called a code base. What the existing code of a company is called the code base, and for these companies, there might be tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of lines of code, nobody of which can like singularly understand all of this. But like what your function has to do. I have to write this function that fulfills like X purpose. And I trust that like all the other engineers and everyone within this system has done what they need. So if I write my small part, it's going to be workable with the rest. That's kind of how that works. So knowing that process is helpful for working with engineers. And this is why like non-technical people can absolutely be product managers as well. It would be lying to say there's not a little bit of like snobbishness within the engineering community that like, oh, if you're not an engineer, you don't have to be a computer scientist, but if you're not an engineer, they might say like, hey, like you're a marketing person. You don't really get like how difficult this technical stuff is.
Yeah.
So it's helpful for credibility to have that.
Yeah.
But absolutely, like you don't have to write code to understand how this system works and respect the work and like the difficulty of work that people do. And if you do that, any like non-technical person, also with a bit of training and reading, can totally do this job well.
Interesting. And then you went into your corporate strategy rotation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, what were your responsibilities there? How was that different? What did you learn?
So I thought the corporate strategy role was very exciting, actually. So one of the, I think, concepts to think about in your early career is who are you in the room with? Who are you learning from? And often people will say like, don't be the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room, or go be with people who are more experienced than you, smarter than you, senior to you, etc. And that's why a lot of young people, go into these consulting roles. Like, hey, I get to talk with these executives. I have this role, and I get to see, with 2 years of career experience, what an executive with 25 year of career experience has to contend with. So that's one of the most appealing things about those types of roles. Within my, client services role, I was kind of talking to more kind of individual, not individual, but I wasn't really talking to the bank CEO most of the time. That did happen, but it was more rare. It would be more so, let's talk to the risk team and compliance team about their structure of that department, or let's talk to the credit cards team about the different kind of products they have. Should we launch a new product? Should we sunset an existing product? How do you compete with other clients that are coming in and offering more rewards or some other kind of trend in the industry? So I would work with different sides of the business, but I wasn't really getting to do the full picture in one project. In corporate strategy, I got to do that a little bit more. So the seniority of the people I worked with internally increased. So I was working with the most senior people I've worked with. In fact, I worked on presentations that went to the company's board. So that's, cool. It's exciting. It's also stressful in some ways, because then that's the kind of consulting thing where you do like 16 different versions of one slide, and probably the first version or the second version is the one you end up picking anyway.
Yeah.
But like so many cooks in the kitchen wanted different versions and revisions of it. So you did it 16 times anyway. So then, that can be frustrating about it. But you do get to see like, okay, like what do, all these top people at this company care about, what's on their mind, and you get to work on that. So I enjoyed the corporate strategy role.
So what are you strategizing, if that's even how you put it? Yeah.
So for corporate strategy, I think a lot of people are very drawn to the strategy part of things. But strategy it's not so much like we have to think about this every day, do this every day, because, the industry is like evolving over time, but nothing really changes overnight. So let's say, like your Game of Thrones, you're in the war room, are we going to attack A or are we going to attack B? You decide. It maybe takes you like a 4-hour meeting, and maybe like leading up to that 4-hour meeting, you do a couple of weeks of preparation on, let's assess this enemy's defenses, or let's assess this other enemy's like attack, and who are they allying with? Like, what's the kind of political environment here? And you decide who to attack, if you're going to attack someone, or you decide like, let's not attack. They're going to attack each other. We just sit and wait it out. You decide your strategy. But, that process that takes 2-3 weeks, then the rest of it being carried out is 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. So it's a long process. So a lot of people think, especially coming from these consulting roles, of like, hey, I do this thing and I like come up with this fantastic strategy. And they say like, oh, like, isn't it like a shame it's not being implemented just because we're like consultants? If I was at the company, I could totally implement this. It's not, sometimes these things are implemented, but even if you're on the corporate strategy side, having exited from consulting, not all of your ideas will come to life. The execution part is often a lot more messy than you think it is. So you'll have to really think about, how do we execute this if we're doing some sort of transformation within the company, some sort of change to like old processes. Okay, how do you teach 50,000 people to do that? And what do you tell the managers to tell the employees? What do you tell to managers of managers, et cetera? So all these like big processes need to happen for your, 2-week, we came up with this strategy in a room thing to be carried out. And then you might actually get different feedback as you're carrying it out. Hey, like, we don't like this change. Like, and then you have to think to yourself, like, do we resist this? Like, oh, did we, mess up and people don't like this? Should we do something else? Or you believe in your vision and you say like, no, this is like a painful process to go through, but we do know that this new organizational structure is actually going to be better for people. It's going to be more horizontal. You're going to have more autonomy to do things. We believe this is going to empower employees to be more productive. And of course, it's difficult to like not have super clear structure immediately. But yeah, we do want to move toward this more decentralized thing or more flatter hierarchy, let's say.
So just to clarify for me, because again, I don't know this space so well. What's the difference between this corporate strategy role and your consulting role, if you're both advising companies on how to like operate? I mean, I guess consulting isn't always doing that, but
so consulting is with clients. The corporate strategy role is your company, so you don't have any other clients. Corporate strategy is like, I just work on the strategy of our company.
I see. So you're really operating within your company.
Yes,
yes. That makes sense.
There's no external side of the corporate strategy unless you're working on something with like external partners or other vendors or something. But then like you're the client, like you would be the client of that other company rather than it's like they are your client and you're advising them on something. You're kind of coming up with what the strategy should be.
That makes sense. So then looking at all these 3 experiences that you've had at your company, do you think you needed your consulting work in order to go into especially the corporate strategy side of things?
So I don't think you need any sort of prerequisite experience to do anything unless, you're going to be a neurosurgeon. You're going to operate on me. I would like that you have studied what you're going to do.
Yes.
But for most corporate roles, if you're hungry enough, you're hardworking enough, you are curious to like learn these things and do and kind of learn from, I always say like learn from the best, And you can't go and say like, hey, I want to learn about business from Elon Musk because Elon Musk is the best. You're not there yet. You need to get someone who's like within your range of capability and like competence, who is going to teach you, like who is the best like available around you. So, let's say you want to learn marketing, go find a good marketer at a company and, talk to them, get your foot in the door and learn from them. You could have studied computer science and you want to do marketing. I might ask you, they might ask you like, where did this passion for marketing come from all of a sudden if you studied computer science? But if you can explain it, you can go do that. Or there's a lot of career switchers who will have done something else. They take a coding boot camp. They want to go be a software engineer or a data scientist. So, of course, there's a lot of transferable skills between all of these roles, especially any kind of corporate role. Your early few years, you're understanding how does a corporation operate. So you're transitioning from college, like, what are the rules of this game? If you decide to stay in the corporate game, like long term, you kind of understand, okay, this is how like things are operating. So it's helpful in that sense. But I absolutely think an entry-level consultant or an entry-level product manager or entry-level corporate strategy like role, if you can prove that you can do the job and you're hungry enough to do it, by all means, like you don't need these things as a stepping stone. But most corporate strategy roles will require that you did 2 or 3 years of consulting as sort of like a badge of honor or something you need to have to, like this is vetted.
Yeah. What are your hours?
So I typically work 50 hours in a given week. I would say like plus or minus 5 hours is normal. So more busier, more client meetings happening, or, on occasion I'll go to the client offices as well, or if we're doing a final presentation, or we're doing a pitch on sort of how we should evolve our partnership over time. We're trying to sell like a follow-on project or another product. then I might want to be in the room with the client for that. So, those types of weeks is busier, but then there's also other weeks where, I am in those compliance reviews, etc., from with the clients, and I'm just waiting. So the other projects are like less busy. So I'll have 40-hour weeks, or sometimes even sub 40-hour weeks. You can have them.
Yeah. What do you think are the skills you're using most on a daily basis?
Skills I'm using most on a daily basis, I think. So the first is critical thinking and asking good questions. I'm not saying, go be like a couch philosopher and be like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this strategy? Like, why should I do these slides? Like, what's the point on all of this? You have to do the things you're going to do. But it's really, okay, like we want to launch a new product with this bank. Yeah, think for a minute about, okay, like why are we launching this product? Is it because our competitors have gotten stronger? Is it because our products have gotten old? Has something shifted about the market that requires a new product? And then, okay, like we're clear on the decision that like we need a new product. Then, okay, like what are we going to look at? So really asking those like key critical questions is very important. And I think this is a skill that's applicable across any role, any industry, any seniority. In fact, if I look at my experiences with the top executives working at these companies, their top skill is probably asking good questions. So that and like critical thinking, I would say, is the one thing that's sort of applicable across all my roles that I can apply. And then there's some role specific things where, if you're doing product management, you should know all of that software development lifecycle. How does that work? How do we do that? Like you need to know like some of those like technical things. But for the most part, I think people go into consulting in these types of roles for the soft skills that they call the consulting toolkit. So yes, like asking good questions, communicating properly. There's some sort of like financial skills as well. Like you don't have to be Excel modeling whiz. I think it's kind of funny when like companies write these like job descriptions of like, you can do a full financial model without touching your mouse. Who cares? Like if it's correct, if it's readable, if I get the numbers right and stuff, I don't have to do it the fastest, or I don't have to be like that technical savvy with it. As long as it's serving its business purpose, great.
And then what do you think you've learned the most from all your different roles at this company?
I would say the biggest learning is kind of how to work with people, how to like fill a role within an organization that's within your skills and capabilities. And this role evolves over time. So at first you learn how to be sort of a contributor, right? You start as an individual contributor. Then my role has evolved into that of a manager. I manage projects, I have direct reports, I have teams. So I have a dual responsibility there to the company to make sure that that person is, productive, happy, stays with the company as long as is possible and is good for the company. And as long as we want to keep them. And on the other side, I have an obligation to like my direct reports of like, hey, how are we growing your career? Are you doing the type of work that's interesting to you, that you feel like you're contributing, you understand your role? So the biggest thing I've learned out of my 5 years of professional experience is, like how do you slot in and do these things? And how do you contribute? You can be a leader at any level. Being a leader is not necessarily like something that's designated to you with a title. I've seen a lot of people with a lot of tenure who are not leaders, and I've seen people with 2 days of experience who just come in with that like hunger to do something who are leaders. So, when I say I've learned how to fit into a role, don't take it as, I've learned to kind of be satisfied with my position within this corporate hierarchy and I'll just wait out and climb. No, it's just, I've learned how to contribute, how to maximize my contributions and what's appropriate and what's inappropriate in that kind of setting. And, that all that knowledge I'll take with me to, any future role or endeavor, be that entrepreneurship or something else. I can take that with myself and say, okay, I learned how this company is organized. I'm going to go and do my own thing. I have some ideas about how to organize a company. It'll be different from a $30,000 person company, because then, I have to start with one employee as myself. But there's things that you can apply.
Yeah. No, that's a really good answer. I like that answer. My final question for your corporate work in that is that you have grown in this client services team and you have progressed and now gotten direct reports. What do you think is something that you did specifically to demonstrate your ability to grow at the company?
So I'm going to quote, I think, Warren Buffett here, but if it's a misquote, we can fact check it later and put it in the notes. But he says it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 20 seconds to ruin one. So that's very important, especially sort of first impressions matter. There's this kind of psychological effect called the peak end effect. So people remember sort of like your first impression. They also remember sort of like the peak. So like, was it like, good and exciting in some way, or you did something terrible and horrifying, and they'll remember that. And they kind of also remember like the last thing you did. So, you want to start with a good first impression of, I'm doing the work that's given to me and I'm doing it well. One of the things that I struggled with a bit, and I see like a lot of ambitious people struggle with, is you want to do everything. And you can do everything over time, right? Like I got to do consulting, I got to do product management, I got to do corporate strategy. But had I tried to do all of them at the same time, I would have failed miserably at all of them. So you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. So you want, like, the way you get more responsibility in these companies is you assume ownership of things that are like given to you. You're not like, oh, I just did my slide, I sent it to my manager, it's done, I can sign off. It's good. I like it if a junior person will ask me like, hey, I finished these slides, but I know the client presentation is coming up in a few days. Is there anything else you need help with? Even if I don't, I make a note of that. Like, hey, this person is trying to be helpful. If in the future I have another task that's going to be a good learning opportunity or some sort of exposure, and then it should go to someone, I'll think of that person. So you want to be helpful. You want to kind of be careful with like how much work you take on stuff that you can do it well. And as you do that well, you'll kind of like improve on your reputation. And you should be known for sort of like different things at like later stages in your career. So early on, the kind of reputation I wanted to build was one of a reliable individual contributor who's I can take in unstructured instructions and still come up with something, or I assume responsibility. If my manager is sick and they're out, I'm not going to be clueless about things. I'm going to have some sort of idea that I can go to like the next most senior person saying like, hey, manager's out sick today. These are the things we talked about that should happen before the end of the week. I can take care of X, Y, and Z, but I actually don't know how to do this other thing. How should we do it? Can you step in or like show me how to do it? Then suddenly, like, I'm not saying like your manager being out is an opportunity for you, but that other person might say like, oh, wait a minute, like I don't actually work all the time with this more junior person, but they seem to be really knowing what they're doing. So that was important to me starting out my career. Now, like being an effective mentor, like structuring the team well so that other people get to. This is also another transition that people who are very high in individual performers like struggle with, is because your job at this point is not to make sure everything is perfect to your liking on everything and like done your way. Other people will do their things their way, and as long as it's good for the client is happy. It doesn't have to be my way or the highway. So okay, like how do I coach these people? Even if it's inefficient at first, I could do this task in 30 minutes myself. It's going to take them 2 hours to do a first draft, another hour for me to review, and then another hour for them to do it again. Like that investment 3 to 6 months later pays off. So now the reputation I am working on building is that of a effective leader and mentor. And that's what I'm working on. So that's sort of what's been the key driver for me to get these opportunities that I got internally.
Yeah. I like how well you articulate what you're trying to strive for at your different times of your career, and how it's really interesting to see how that indeed does change in terms of just your personality, but also in terms of your experiences. I think that's really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And I will say this for the listeners. I didn't come in with this grand plan at like age 22 graduating. I'm going to do consulting, then I'm going to do product management or corporate strategy, then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to learn how to be a mentor, and like I'll go like figure out whatever. You sort of, it's helpful to have a sort of like 3 to 5 year plan or rough idea, but a lot of opportunities come at you. So especially if you keep, doing well and taking your chances. So you don't have to know what you're going to do. I did have an idea that I want to be, a strong individual contributor and have that like reliability as part of my reputation. But beyond that, I, didn't know all of these things necessarily. So if you don't have it in your plans, like, hey, what am I going to do after 2 years? I'm just doing consulting now for the learnings. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like go do it. Do it as well as you can. Learn what you're learning. And the moment you feel like your learning is slowing down, then you start thinking about, okay, like what do I want to learn next? And you take it as you go.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Speaking of that grand plan, I now want to talk a bit about your journey to your work that you're doing now. We mentioned earlier that you majored in comp sci.
Yes.
Why didn't you go down the more traditional comp sci route?
So I actually didn't come into college knowing that I was going to study computer science. And if it were up to me, I might have studied psychology or neuroscience. Those were the topics that I was most interested in. I'm a very extroverted person. I'm a people person. So I like, things that are kind of about people. But me being sort of an international student and the immigration system and the work authorization system in the US being as complicated and as difficult as it is, all of my college advisors said, like, hey, you should study some sort of engineering at least. It, doesn't really matter what it is, but you should be in the engineering school. So that kind of said, like, hey, like psychology, whatever, like forget about it. Like neuroscience you can do, but, are you going to be like a researcher? If you're like not sure about that, like just go do some engineering. And it's very typical for like people from like my country to go do engineering, or like those like stereotypes of like, oh, are you going to be an engineer or the doctor or like a lawyer, like those kind of like traditional high performing like things, right, that parents expect from you.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, like you're going to go be an engineer. And initially I had signed up to be an industrial engineer. That was like the more popular major among people I knew. And taking the classes, I took a computer science class, and everyone told me, oh my God, computer science is so hard. I hate it because either my program works to the specifications or it doesn't. Like it's hard to kind of have sort of like, this is a health good program, or this is like I wrote an okay essay, I got a B. Like it's hard to do with computer science. So of course, like you can have like more efficient code that runs in faster time with like less complexity, more readability. But either it like does what it's sort of supposed to do or it doesn't. It's more binary. And a lot of people are very scared by that. But for me, that was actually one of the things I liked the most of like, hey, like this is direct. Like I have to figure this out. And then I also found like a lot of what I mentioned earlier about computer science being more academic rather than programming, right? Like they're not, unless you take like a front end like UX course, not teaching you how to program like a website or like a UX or like some sort of thing. They're teaching you about, so one of my favorite classes was computer science theory, where actually the thing you talk about is what is possible for a computer to calculate in what sort of time frame or complexity frame. So that's why it's actually this like AI revolution now with the hardware getting significantly stronger. Maybe in 10 years with quantum computers and these kind of hardwares, problems that we thought were like unsolvable complexity are going to be solvable, or different kind of like cryptographic things that are powering all of our security systems today might be breakable. So that to me, actually, I thought it was very related to philosophy and very interesting.
That's fascinating.
So I never did have sort of programming or software engineering as something that I would want to do. It wasn't a reason why I took up computer science. I just took an interest in it. I did well. I think if you find that you do something well, you have a natural aptitude for it. It's good to pursue that. You'll enjoy it better.
Do you remember your first exposure to this corporate world? Did you have an internship? Did you know about it? Did you know that that was what you were going after? Did you do like a career fair?
I would say like my first big exposure to it was my junior year internship, and that's sort of the like serious internship, right? Where you get your return offer. If you get your return offer and you like the company, you sort of have your full-time job sorted out. My my freshman year thing in the summer was more of like a shadowing sort of thing. Like I did stuff, but it wasn't very much like responsibilities. My sophomore year, I worked at a startup. I did have a lot of responsibilities, but I was in a generalist role, and like a 30-person early stage startup is very different from like a multiple thousand person company with all these like processes in place. So I wouldn't say like that exposed me to professional work, but not really in the same sense that all these like big professional companies do. So my junior year is when I had my serious management consulting internship. That's where I traveled to client side all the time. I worked 80 hours a week, and I found the work to be intellectually stimulating, but it wasn't something that I wanted to do full time with the like sacrifices that came with it. I totally understand if people want to do that kind of consulting or banking job for the opportunities it gives you like 2 years down the line. But as I said, I think there's other ways to be successful that often as like kids who went to like a very high pressure school, like you see all your friends working at Goldman Sachs, working at McKinsey, working at Facebook. You're like, I have to go through these things. So there's a lot of pressure, but I felt like lucky that I could tell myself, no, I'll be successful in other ways as long as I work hard and prove that I can, do what I set out to do. And that's a ongoing commitment. You can't ever stop that. You have to keep working hard. But I said, I want to keep doing sports and taking care of my body. And I want to keep seeing my friends occasionally for a weeknight dinner. Like I want that to be on the cards for myself. So I, didn't do that full time.
Did you use any resources at college to help you find your internships and then your job afterwards?
Yeah. So I had a lot of upperclassmen friends who knew this stuff kind of better than I did. So I would always like ask them for their advice. Like, hey, how do you do this interview prep? Or I'm writing a cover letter for this thing. Or what's the best way? Should I go like LinkedIn, like cold emails or messages for like networking? What should I do? I did make use of everything that's the Columbia offered us as well. So, anything where like the career fair or going to the career coaches there, showing them your resume and saying like, how should I apply? Like, how should I write a cover letter? They'll help with those things. But the things that I found the most helpful were really my, upperclassmen friends who had sort of been there and done that and like gotten the internship that I wanted or gotten the full-time offer that I wanted at the time. And they were the best resources.
Do you remember any of the advice that they gave you specifically with, applying for your job, and like interview advice that they gave you?
I think the like standard advice for these types of roles is just to like over prepare if you can, because as much as I'm a confident person, like I did maybe like 15, 20 consulting cases, and I said, okay, I could do 100 cases, but I feel good enough. It's all about like the 80-20 thing, right? I feel good enough. Hopefully it's not a terrible case that I like don't have any idea to approach, but I should be fine. And, I got some offers I wanted, but I also had friends who did do those like 100 cases, and on average, they got more offers. Because this is those are like very type A roles where you're with the most type A of type A people. And that's why also I think like full-time, like the reason a lot of these people burn out is, okay, you got into McKinsey, you got into BCG, you got into Facebook or Google or whatever, and you want to be the best consultant or the best software engineer. Guess what? Everybody else wants to also do the same thing. And they're also like equally, hungry and like competent as you. So when it comes to that, like big pond, small fish, small pond, like big fish thing, I think it's good to, like go swim with the sharks, like learn from them. But it can also like lead to good outcomes to not necessarily be in the most competitive place. And be able to compete a little easier, and then you'll get your opportunities like that way as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. So then, and I'm curious about this. So you did your internship. You mentioned it was really the hours that kept you away from it, but you did like the work. So then how did you go about finding this job that was still consulting, still the work that you were interested in, but had a better work-life balance?
It was pretty lucky, actually. And there's not too many of these types of roles. There are some of them. But luckily enough, this was a company that was recruiting on campus, and I did have a friend of a friend who worked there. And before taking the job, I didn't really know how it compared to traditional management consulting, or what kind of like career next steps it would entail if I took this job. But I did like the company. I did like the values of the company. I liked what the company was doing. So I prepared for the interviews, and it worked out.
And it worked out. Yeah. That makes sense. You've been giving such excellent advice so far, so I want to get some more of your advice. Firstly, what advice would you have for someone who wants to go into the line of work that you have gone into?
So for someone who wants to go into consulting or corporate strategy, I would say understand the kind of sacrifices it's going to require from you to kind of do this, because everything in life is difficult. So you have this corporate job that's easier hours, but maybe you're bored of the work, and it feels nice for a few years, but then it catches up to you, or you do this super hardo banking or consulting job, and as I did enjoy the intellectual part of it, you like the intellectual part of it, but then the work catches up to you. Or you want to be an entrepreneur, then you're out there fighting for clients. You have to pay the bills. You have employees. You have to do that for them. So there's there's different kinds of difficult and different things you struggle for. And as long as you know what you're struggling for, yes, I am going to do this for 2-3 years, then I do want to jump into something that's going to teach me more. Or no, I freaking like this. I want to be a partner. There's fewer people who would go in saying, I like this, I'm going to be a consulting partner. But as long as you know what you're struggling for, then there's some meaning to that, right? But if you don't know that, and you just say, well, all my friends are doing banking and all my friends are doing consulting, and I don't know what I want to do, and I want to be a successful person, so this is the thing to do, then you might be in for a bad time. So that's the thing I would warn against.
That is excellent advice. And now just generally speaking, what is the best career advice that you have received and you have applied to your own life and want to pass on to other people, to our listeners? So
I'll actually call out someone that people I think should look up on Instagram, on TikTok, and LinkedIn, on any platforms he is. This guy, his name is Graham Weaver. He is the founder of a private equity fund called Alpine Investors. And he is now, I think, either a part-time instructor at Stanford Business School. So that's why he's been putting out a lot more of his content. And a couple of his key ideas are, he says really have this will to win. He says he hires people based on kind of who they are, not what they've done or their tenure necessarily. Like I mentioned, you can be a leader at any tenure within your company, right? You shouldn't necessarily step on people's toes or be a thorn, but you should, you can be a leader. So he says so first of all, I choose someone based on, are they willing to win? Do they have this ownership? Are they going to really, if I am the best, then I'm going to give the opportunity to teach them. Are they going to take it and run with it? So that I think is very good. And the second is sort of more about, he says you should, discover your own thing. And it's very difficult to do, but you should do it for a long time and be consistent with it, because it takes maybe 10 years for you to, let's say your podcast, right? Now you're working on the first few episodes, and you're, spending many hours in the background editing and researching like what kind of roles are interesting to my listeners, who are my listeners, etc. Those types of things. People don't see all that. People see like, oh, Lacey has a podcast. And if in 2 years from now you have 100,000 listeners, people will be like, oh my God, look at this thing Lacey's done. Like she just started podcasting and now she has like 100,000. And people might think it's easy, and it's not easy, right? You have to do all of that work. So again, his name, Graham Weaver. So he says like, yeah, be hungry, like have the will to win, and, you know, go do your own thing and do it for a long time. I think that's some of the best career advice I've seen, either I've received in person or seen online.
Yeah. I love that. So then, finally, what's next?
You know, I did mention that I'm sort of in the point of my career where I'm working on my kind of mentorship and team management and making sure that I can transition from, hey, I'm a good or great individual contributor to, you know, I can manage a team. I can make sure that even if their working styles are not the same as me, I can get the best out of my team. So that's, you know, right now what I'm focused on, and I'll continue for some time. But I do know that eventually I'll want to be my own boss, and I talked about like decision making and like living with the outcomes and sort of like learning from that. I do think you need to have that sort of ownership to really learn. So I'd, you know, love to be an entrepreneur. I'd love to start my own thing. But you know, for now, I think I'm still learning a lot of valuable skills. You don't have to rush it. A lot of people think if they're not a multimillionaire founder at like 27 on like Forbes 30 on their 30 list, like they're doing things wrong, because we have some peers who are doing that.
Yes, we do.
And that's great for them. But actually, a lot of successful entrepreneurs don't start their ventures until they're 35 or 40. So, you know, don't wait, because stuff will get in the way. But if you're ready, and you'll never be ready, right? Like you have to make that jump before you feel ready, and then you'll kind of grow and step out of your comfort zone. But right now I'm happy with what I'm learning. But, you know, eventually I'll do my own thing.
So you're a man we're going to have to keep an eye on then and see where you go. That is very, very exciting. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been absolutely fascinating, and I have learned a lot, that is for sure. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Lacey. My pleasure.